Hi, Dr. Sylvia. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. And I'm excited to talk about everything that you've been working on and as well as our topic for today. But just before that, for everyone who may have not been a part of the deep dive sessions before or seen those, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce the Listeners Collective and the Indian Wheel of Power and Powerlessness, as well as you, our expert for today. So, the Listeners Collective is a mental health services organization. We are a multidisciplinary team of mental health and social justice professionals providing individual psychotherapy. We also build and deliver community well-being programs and psychosocial interventions with marginalized communities. Our primary aim is to foreground an intersectional lens in all mental health interventions and conversations. Um, the Indian Wheel of Power and Powerlessness is actually it's a visual tool. It is an adaptation of the original Wheel of Power and Privilege by your namesake, Sylvia Duckworth. We've used the Wheel of Power and Privilege in a few of our programs in the past, and we realized that there was a need for it to be adapted to the Indian context, just considering the vast diversity that we have in India with socio-political, socio-cultural, and socio-economic identities, right? So we worked on and released the Indian Wheel of Power and Powerlessness in July 2022. We really hope that it is a tool that any one of us can use and refer to understand even our own positions of power or powerlessness, vis-a-vis the different identities that we assume. But the wheel at the end of the day is also only a diagram, and we felt limited in being able to express adequate nuance and really to cover different aspects of lived experience through just a picture. So the deep dive sessions were conceived as a means to be able to take a bit of a deeper look and to foreground more experiences associated with each of these identities through, expert interviews, panel discussions, perspective sharing, as well as lived experiences that people may have with the identities. So this quarter, we are exploring the triad of caste identity, religious identity, and economic position. The last couple of months, we spent a lot of time understanding caste identity and its interactions with mental well-being. This month, and most likely the next as well, given how expansive this topic is, we are looking at religious identity and its contribution to the experiences of power and powerlessness in the context of mental well-being. So we have Dr. Sylvia Karpagam with us. Dr. Sylvia is a public health doctor with around 18 to 20 years of experience. Dr. Sylvia's work addresses health and social determinants from a rights perspective with communities, networks, and human rights organizations. I'm just going to pause here and also invite Dr. Sylvia to talk about their work a little bit.
Hi, Ganga. Thank you. It's nice to see you, even though it's virtually. And thank you for this work also. I think it's really important. We constantly have people, asking for sensitive mental health services and, support. So it's good that these areas are being explored from an Indian and, in a kind of a context of India rather than just, cutting and pasting some other models. Because this particular issue specifically is very much rooted in where one comes from, and even the understanding has to come from there. It can't be like a prescriptive or top-down thing. So thank you for that. Yeah, about myself, I'm a medical doctor and I've also done community medicine, and I am interested in regulation of the private health sector because I do feel that unless public health services are strengthened and made accessible, it's not going to be, it's not going to be an egalitarian or comprehensive system of healthcare. And definitely the private health sector in India needs a lot of regulation. So that's something I'm interested in. But I'm also interested in the social determinants of health. Because as most of us know, we have a lot of knowledge even among our families and among our, parents, grandparents, and most of them know that it's not only about going to a hospital or having a hospital that is going to ensure healthcare. You need a whole bunch of other things. You need pollution can affect your health, the water, the kind of food that you eat, whether you sleep or whether you're educated, the area where you live in, the kind of sanitation, all of those, affect access to healthcare. And I'm specifically interested in caste, because I feel it often gets left out. And increasingly, I think religion is also showing up in many ways, about how one's religion can make one die earlier, one's religion can make one more sick, which is very sad. And I think that's something I just almost see like casteism and communalism as public health crisis that India is going through. It's not a religious crisis or political crisis, it's also a public health crisis. So yeah, increasingly I find myself more and more working on those domains. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Sylvia. I'm going to add on to that because there is a lot more that you've done, which I've been quite taken in by. So, just going to add on to say that Dr. Sylvia also represents the Indian chapter of the Global Equal Health Social Medicine Consortium, campaign against racism and discrimination. As a part of the Right to Health campaigns at both the state and national levels in India, Dr. Sylvia has conducted trainings, research, and also published articles on impact, particularly on vulnerable communities of privatization and commercialization of healthcare and nutrition. Um, Dr. Sylvia has also published peer-reviewed journals about the impact of public-private partnership and health insurance, as well as critiqued the lack of regulation in private healthcare. Um, in the last 20 years, Dr. Sylvia has worked very closely with communities and social determinants, like she just mentioned, such as education, water, sanitation, nutrition, housing, etc., that affect and interact with health and well-being. So, Dr. Sylvia, I mean, as we just discovered and know, has worked extensively with vulnerable and marginalized communities. And we are really hoping that today's interview can shed light on the many ways in which access to care is compromised for religious minorities. This is especially for those individuals who are also care providers themselves, to understand how layered religious identity can be, right? And also the different experiences across those layers. We're also hoping that there are takeaways of some reflective practices for all of us, especially those of us who are the religious majority and therefore privileged. Um, and there are things that I think you have spoken about, Dr. Sylvia, which I'm going to allude to later on in the interview, which I think can actually be reflective tools that all of us can engage with. So just to start us off, I am going to pull up the Indian Wheel of Power and Powerlessness for us to just look at together. And I will invite you to share your thoughts on also the plotting across the wheel. Okay, so this is the Indian Wheel of Power and Powerlessness. And as you can see, there are three levels that we have on this wheel. At the center is power. So the little red circle that you see here is where we believe the power is concentrated. And then there is one belt here, which is the innermost circle, which is closest to power. So we've plotted groups within this circle, which we believe are the closest to power. And then the middle circle has groups that we believe are a little further away from power, but not in the margins. So they do enjoy some privileges or some power by virtue of their identity. And then finally, we have the third group, which is the outermost circle. This is the group which is the furthest away from power, from the center, and therefore in the margins and marginalized, right? So we have, for today, we are going to be looking at religion. And I'm just going to open up another diagram, which can be more helpful to look at religion in specific. Can you see this diagram?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. All right. So this has caste, religion, and economic position magnified, which is the triad that we're looking at, and then religion specifically highlighted here as well, right? So as you can see, for religion specifically, we have the groups that are closest to power that we've plotted are people practicing Hinduism, as well as we believe individuals who are vested with power by their religious practices or by their religion. So, for instance, priests, clergymen do get afforded some power by virtue of that identity, irrespective of the religion that they belong to. And then in the middle belt, we have individuals practicing Jainism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Sikhism, Judaism, also unconventional religious identities like, for instance, atheism or agnosticism, right? And then finally, in the outermost belt, we have Muslims, Christians, or indigenous religious minorities. Um, Before we go on to actually unpacking this, I'm just going to start with a disclaimer that one, we understand that this is a pretty dynamic space, right? So the groups that hold power or privilege by virtue of their religious identity can shift and change, contingent to, of course, other related influencing determinants like political parties in power and so on. But what we have attempted to do is to capture best the situation as it is today. And the other thing that we are also aware of is that we found it particularly challenging, in fact, to plot groups in the middle and the outermost belt because there are so many overlaps, right? Like, for instance, it also depends on the vantage point you take. Knowing that India is a religious country, we know that individuals who practice, say, atheism, are actually marginalized. They can be considered to be marginalized. Or if we consider the groups that are considered minorities by the Ministry of Minority Affairs, then even Parsis and Sikhs would be included in the last or the outermost belt, right? So there are those, I think, nuances and caveats to this plotting. Um, but irrespective, what we've gone with is violence and heightened discrimination that occurs against religious minorities, and used that as a measure or degree of marginalization to finally plot these groups. But it's far from a perfect, accurate picture. I think this is something that we believe is going to change over time as well. And also, we want for it to be informed by expert opinion and just opinions of individuals with lived experience as well. So, having said that, I'm just going to take a pause and invite you to also share your thoughts on what do you think about the groups that are plotted here. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall idea is good in the sense that if you look at it holistically, you will get a sense of, who are closest to power. But looking, say, only at religion, the kind of things that jump out at me is that, like the geographic location and the caste and class obviously make a huge difference in, this how close one is to power or not, because like, for example, say someone who is identified as a Hindu, but who, say, challenging some of the traditional practices, they don't they pushed away from the power, and the words like urban axle and traitor and anti-national, it's very readily applied to them as well. It's not like, I have power and therefore if I use that power I'm going to change the system. It's that you will then be removed from whatever power that you may hold. And again, caste within all the religions makes a huge difference. You have like the elite Muslims, and you have the elite Christians who might be completely disconnected with what's happening to some of their poorer people in their own community. The lynchings that happen is always of the poorest people, the poorest people who are in this religious space. But also, you have um, um, say, for example, custodial torture or being put into incarceration and unlawful incarceration. It's not the rich, even if you're from a minority, religion. It's not the rich who will get put into prisons and picked up. Again, geography matters. Like, you have Muslims who are here, for example, in Karnataka, who are called Bangladeshis. So the any offense or any targeting that happens, they become extremely vulnerable. Also, if they are migrants from other states, their kind of vulnerability is much more, as opposed to say a rich businessman here who's able to call some authorities and who's able to pull some strings. And even if it's not publicly done, a lot of it is done, because of goodwill and personal kind of relationships. Also, in Karnataka, we, like, for example, the Jain community, we see that they hold a lot of influence. Like, we are fighting for the eggs in the midday meal scheme, and there's complete resistance, mainly from the Jain, which or like the Krishna consciousness group, that is ISKCON, and then from the Matas, the Lingayat Matas. So in terms of power, I think it changes also to some extent. Yeah, and the uh, yeah, I think the fact of caste within all these religions do make a huge difference in terms of power.
Yeah. So you're saying that there's caste segregation within each of these religions as well that
Yes.
contributes to the experience of power or powerlessness. And
So
as we know, I think
yeah,
it's
go on.
most often than not the economically poor, of course, by
Yeah.
virtue of their caste identity as well, that are most affected. I was also hoping, Dr. Sylvia, the last quarter, I mean, the last few months, we spoke to Dr. Vimal and Tinmuri from Equality Labs. And, an important point that they raised was about how we spoke about caste, right, and caste privilege. And caste minorities. And Tinmuri raised this very important point about how when we think of caste stress, for instance, we automatically, or the first pathway that we refer to is the stress and harm that is occurring to caste oppressed people, right? And she said that, of course, but caste privileged people also carry stress, and that stress is mainly based off of denial, complicity, or watching the violence that's happening. And there's very little tolerance for discussions related to caste and privilege that they, can engage with, and that sort of obstructs the course of progress entirely, right? And there was something that you posted recently that had caught my eye on social media, where, and we link it up over here for everyone to see as well. But what you had said was how all religions in India need to introspect on where their religion stands on different parameters. You'd identified a few, and you'd listed them. You'd said caste, gender, human rights, the constitution, and so on, right? So you had said it is important for all religions to reflect on where their religion stands on caste or on gender or on human rights or women's rights or constitution. Right, and you're of course invited more, and there's a few more there, and there's good discourse in your comments. But I was just wondering what made you, say that, right? It seemed like I was just curious about what you were thinking, and if something happened that led for you to say, okay, please sit down and think about this,
Yeah.
right? Um, in many ways it seems like you're asking for people to just and I think it's important for people to have that sort of well-informed view if they are practicing a certain religion about their religion, right?
Yeah.
As to what are areas that need reform even within a certain religious identity.
Yeah. I think it's from what I've seen. Of course, there are people who have like better understanding of these things, but there is, I think, intrinsically we are a very discriminatory society, and we tend to always want to have a high and a low, a superior and an inferior, and that's, I think, part of our Indian way of thinking. I don't think it's any one religion. And we're always trying to find markers of our own superiority and someone else's inferiority. And if someone we feel like, based on our kind of mental checklist, is equal to us or superior to us, then our attitude is so different. Like the way we grovel, when a white person comes, or when a funder comes, we are so willing, and we're inviting them to our homes. And a lot of people say, oh, Indians are so social, Indians are so welcoming. But we're not welcoming to everyone. We are only welcoming to certain people, because our checklist, they deserve to be welcomed, and we've already assigned them a superior status. And Even among religions, I think there's a lot of competitiveness. Like, whether you're minority or in majority, you're always trying to prove why some other religion is bad and your own religion is better. But I think, and also to create victimhood, like to say, I'm facing a problem because of XYZ religions, or my religion is facing a problem because of XYZ reasons. We therefore, because of this, wanting to create a high and low, and also because we want to position ourselves as victims, we tend not to introspect. And I think that's across the board, across all religions, whether we are majority or minority. um, like, for example, Christianity, it's a religion that is charity based. A lot of the work we tend to take pride or credit because of what the religious leaders, or the priests and nuns are doing. But as, say, lay people, the Christians don't feel like a moral compunction to engage with what's happening with the country, to blend solidarity to people who are marginalized. There's a lot of caste-based discrimination. In fact, when the anti-conversion bill was brought, some of the Christians said that's a good thing, because then you won't have all the all these random people converting to Christianity. Then there's also this there's a charity based approach, but then it's not based on constitutional values. It's not like Christians are intrinsically believe in equality or justice or even fraternity. We tend to fraternize with our own, people of our own social background, and we tend to look down and pontificate or be very moralistic about people who are not part of our own religion, who don't speak English. The way people treat their domestic workers, the people who treat the people who provide services to them, it's very much tinted by prejudices, by the need to be superior, by having this very top-down approach. So yeah, I think, I think it's the same for all the other religions as well. I don't think any of us can take a moral high stand, especially if you use a constitution as a framework. I think most of us would fail in that sense.
When you say when we use the constitution as a framework, could you explain that a little bit?
I mean, a lot of people in my groups talk about this idea of fraternity, which I think is a very interesting concept. It's also about equality. Like, if I'm say I'm a doctor and I have some people providing me services, and they come and tell me I can't pay fees for my child, I'm might be okay to do charity, and I feel good about it. Like, I might say, okay, I'll pay the fees for this year. But if, say, they say my son has got a really good job and he's doing very well, he's going abroad, or something like that, I don't think we would feel very threatened by that. We would feel like, intrinsically, like, how can someone like that uh, you know even have the audacity to try and be my equal. So I think we need to revisit the and I think across the board, the way we treat people is different. Like, whether you're a faculty in a school, whether you're a principal, whether you're in a hospital, how do we immediately judge people who walk in? We think that people, if someone is poor, then they must be also stupid. We might spend less time with someone who's not that well dressed, or less patient. Our tone might be different. Maybe we'll use less thank you and less please based on people's class location and social location. And I think all that affects access. Like if a child is going to school, and the very first thing that the child faces is the teacher telling you your parent is a sanitation worker, or your father cleans the streets, therefore you have no business to aspire for more. You need to aspire only for that what your father is doing. Or say, as a doctor, if you're seeing a patient, or as a counselor, if you're seeing a patient and the patient says, I have an issue, I'm feeling like discriminated, or I'm not able to sleep because I'm having these kind of work related stresses, and you say that, and you don't recognize that there's a system and there's a structure that's operating, and you instead you place a burden on individuals, not just placing the burden by saying, ignore it or do something about it, but you actually blame them. Say, why are you like this? Why don't you talk? Why do you wear these different clothes? Obviously, they'll discriminate you. So I think if we understand what the Constitution stands for, and these ideas, especially like even justice, if we look at any situation and we say, I don't agree with what that person is doing. I don't understand or don't agree. But I'll never justify that person being denied XYZ basic rights. Like the hijab issue, for example. I might not agree, or I might be okay with hijab or not okay. That's completely my personal opinion. But I cannot stand back and say, okay, therefore you can deny someone education, or say you can deny someone healthcare. I think we need to be clear about opinions which are fine, as opposed to those opinions, affecting the way we see justice itself, or basic human values or human rights.
Um, but also, I was wondering, Dr. Sylvia, in a podcast you have discussed how regional media communalized coronavirus, right? And in India, especially, there have been many instances of religious persecution and violence that we know of, and it seems to have exacerbated just the experience of everyday hatred, right, for minority groups. Now, with that having linkages to state sanction, and that also translating into conventions in our everyday lives, right, as to what's okay, what's not okay, even contributing to jurisprudence, right, and then that leading to more stereotyping, and then implicit internalized biases that people may hold against minority groups. There have also been reports during the pandemic of how access to healthcare, both physical and mental, was compromised for religious minorities in specific. So I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about, or help us understand, just this whole matrix, right, of media, state, and system that contributes to it being compromised, and especially in your experience as well, how you have seen care being compromised for religious minorities.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of us, we tend to say it's not yet this, it's not yet that, and we tend to minimize it, and rather than and failing to recognize the seriousness of what is happening, and it happens like in phases. Like initially. A couple of years back, some of the things which are so normalized now may not have been normal. We would have been shocked, and now it's become normal. And I think that's what happens. Like over a time, you become more and more desensitized. You normalize more and more things, and that's how the base is built for genocide, or ethnocide, or so some kind of targeted attacks on people. The rest of the society is so numb, and so paralyzed in some ways. So I think we need to lower the bar on what shocks us. It's like, say, a woman, when you see that she was gang raped, then you might feel horrified. But if you hear that a woman was molested, or she was walking on the street and someone used a sexually explicit slur on her, you might not react the same way. But we need to start taking those things also seriously and say even that is completely unacceptable. And in terms of religion, I think a lot of groups are not just irresponsible, but they're actively participating, and they are enabling this, even by their silence and by their complicity. There's a lot of fake news, as we all know, which is being propagated on WhatsApp, and it's actively propagated. It's a there is a targeted structural targeting of specifically the Muslim communities, also the Christian, and even the Sikh and some of the other communities, spreading a lot of misinformation. And this media is again sold out completely. There is the agenda itself is to create hatred. The agenda is not news. I don't think we should call them media or news channels anymore. They are just hate propagating channels for vested interest. Many of them, there's no clear boundary between the media and the party in power. Some of the political parties own media channels. And people don't have that understanding that you should look at the news with much more discernment. There's also, I think, the systems and structures also being changed, laws also being brought in on the pretext of protecting some imaginary victimhood of some other community, or some sentiment of some other community. The idea of the law itself is changing. It's not premised on the constitution, but it is based on someone's sentiment. Like, I don't like eating eggs, so you'll ban eggs. I don't like eating beef, therefore you'll ban beef. It's the consequences of it. One of the person I work with talks about the rule of law. How does the law hold up in terms of these some basic principles? Most of the time, it doesn't. Like, for example, when you're bringing in the UAPA, or you're bringing in laws like sedition, where you're saying that somebody is anti-national, or somebody is a likely threat. It's not that they are a threat or they've committed an act, that they may commit an act. All those are ridiculous if you actually look at it, but they're actually laws. They're actually being given legitimacy, and there are actually judges who are implementing those. So I think all of those are hugely problematic. But the other broader effect of this is how it affects communities, both who are oppressing and those who are oppressed. If you're, say, a majoritarian, the group that is in power, and you have the power to do whatever you want and you have impunity, then what do you choose to do with that power? If you choose to harass women, you choose to put up women on social media and saying this is the deal for the day. You choose to go to someone else's religious place of worship and vandalize it and shout slogans. You catch somebody who's going about their daily life, you beat them, you threaten them, you force them to chant your own religious slogans. And then you you basically put out calls, like you might call for an economic boycott, or you might say that if you're of another religion, then I'll break your stall, I'll uproot your upturn your cart if you're a street vendor. I mean, what does it make you? It just makes you such a horrible person. And it doesn't mean that these people are going to go back home and be like nice husbands or fathers or children. You basically become a bad person in society. And for the people who are affected, I think they withdraw more and more. And there's also a complete sense of betrayal, that these are friends, these are people I trust, these are colleagues. You're seeing messages on workspaces. You're seeing messages in in your apartments where you're living. in your friends, your old friends, you're seeing openly, Islamophobic or anti-minority or casteist messages, and you see no one standing up for you, I think it leads to a sense of betrayal. But there's also, I think, increasingly a sense of fear. I've heard, like, from a lot of friends who are worried about their families, about their children, about their daughters, about their sons. And I think chronic, even all of us know that if you're stressed for, say, 1 or 2 days, it does affect you. It affects your sleep, it affects your appetite. But a chronic stress, it's very difficult for people. It affects their sleep, it affects their health, their sense of self-esteem. They might economically suffer. They may not take up certain jobs, they might have to move house, they might not get houses. There's a tendency to ghettoize people, where you say, okay, I'll be safe only in my own communities. And once ghettoization happens, discrimination gets again more systemic, because we know with caste what happens. If a community is isolated, what you call a Dalit colony, the Anganwadi worker will not go there. The Anganwadis are not set up there. The Asha workers will not go there. The water supply is less to those areas. There's more garbage being dumped in those areas. They don't have access to basic services. So everything gets affected. And then what you do is blame those communities. You'll say, oh, these slums, they're so dirty. Why are they dirty? Because your city's garbage is being dumped there. Are you objecting to that? You say they don't have a bath, but you don't ensure water supply. You're happy as long as you get your Kaveri water or whatever every other day. But the people who get water supply once in 3 or 4 days, when you evict people are shifted from the city to the peripheries. It affects their incomes, it affects their economics. So I think as a society, we need to just easily stop blaming people and look at structures and systems, and you know be much more thoughtful in how we look at all of these things.
Yeah, it's quite a vicious cycle, is what I'm hearing you say, right? Um, and I was actually reading about what you said with urban segregation, just how, especially with the Muslim community as well, the Bombay riots causing for a lot of Muslims to migrate to Karnataka, and just that feeling of safety and security that you believe can only be accessed within your community does seem to have its roots in what you described as being discriminatory practices in everyday life. So I was just wondering, and this may be a bit of a loaded question, Dr. Sylvia, but it's also twofold. One, I was hoping to hear from you on what are things that you think healthcare professionals, counselors as well, especially, should know and be sensitive to, right? So, and this is specifically working with religious minorities as well, is a lot of times there are counselors, doctors, healthcare professionals that are working with individuals who belong to a religious minority. And like you said, there might be a tendency to look at only the intra-individual, factors that's causing distress as opposed to inter, right? And so, what are some things that you think should just be out there as knowledge that's generally known and accessible and understood for professionals?
I mean, I think mental health care generally is not very sensitive, even otherwise. And people come with a lot of prejudices, not just like counselors, but also, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, a lot of intrinsic prejudices. Like, for example, this thing that Muslim women have a lot of children. Just that one prejudice means that every time a Muslim woman goes into a hospital, she's faced with this, like, people are constantly telling her, people are constantly judging her, they're laughing and they're mocking at her. And of course, there is also denial of care. People think, this is a waste of resources. But if you actually look at it, the number of pregnancies that a woman has is also related to a whole bunch of other things. Related to poverty, it's related to education, it's related to access to healthcare services. It's related to how the system itself is behaving with you. And therefore, unless all of these things are addressed, irrespective of one's religion, if one has access to education and better incomes, then the family size comes down, whether it's Hindu or Christian or Muslim women. And when the system itself is unapproachable and inaccessible to some people, then people tend to stop using those systems. So basically it's we who contribute to that whole negative cycle. And like, for example, when the COVID pandemic happened and you had this whole thing of blaming the Muslim community using the Tablighi Jamaat, there's no scientific basis for that, because we know that the way a pandemic is spread is there's first of all, it was international. It's the international travelers who brought it into the country, and the government could have done any number of things to handle it at that point, which they didn't. And once it comes in, like wherever a infected person goes, you're going to have a pocket there. But then it became an easy way to target people. But how that translated into real life is for people to actually, economic boycotts, and also the healthcare became very discriminatory, the healthcare system. And not only looking at the science behind it and saying, no, we have taken an oath not to be discriminatory. What they do is actually participate in that. They become part of the system. So I think for healthcare people, we need to have places to understand our own prejudices. Like, for example, nutrition is a huge area where prejudices operate. You go to a doctor with any problem, it doesn't come from a scientific basis. Because you need meat for good quality proteins, you need meat for other nutrients, you need eggs, you need milk, but you will not have a doctor telling you this, because they come from this bias that vegetarianism is somehow superior. So I think we need to have these spaces where we are able to understand our own prejudices and also address them. But also, I think having diversity is important, and the diversity shouldn't be just on tokenism on paper. If you have someone, say, from other communities, you should be able to sit together and say, hey, listen, I have a different perspective, or I have a different understanding of how you should treat this or understand this whole condition. I think that makes us more better, doctors and better counselors. But what happens is we resent anyone who's different from coming in. And if you see the kind of casteism that is there, out of 100 people from a dominant caste group, you might have 1 or 2 or 3 people at the max who are different from that. uh, this so seen as so threatening. You'll do everything. You'll insult them, you'll humiliate them, you'll abuse them, you'll ridicule them, so much so that they feel they need to leave those spaces. So I think that threat perception is extremely high. uh, and unless we are willing to hear people, like even patient groups, talk to people, ask what's the best timing you like, or do you want a female counsel, do you want a male doctor, do you want a female counselor, or do you want someone who's more aware of gender identities, do you want a different language? I think learning that doesn't make us inferior, but I think we are very much scared to from our positions to say that we want to learn. It's like we know everything. I think that has to break.
And the second part of this, Dr. Sylvia, I was wondering if you could also talk a little bit about how access to protection and safe spaces can be democratized, right? And here is where we spoke about what professionals can do, and we could talk a little bit about how systems and the state in general play a role in democratizing access to protection and safe spaces for religious minorities.
Yeah. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. Some people say that all these systems or structures are representative of what's happening in society at large. And unless society changes these, like, for example, the judiciary or the education system, the police, the health system, all of them are just going to be a replication of what's happening in society. But also, they gain the impunity from society. Like if a police does an encounter killing, the fact, if the police says that it was a terrorist, or it was a rapist, or use some kind of very uh, words loaded with meaning, then society is going to be okay with that. They say, then it's okay. Then it's okay to shoot someone without them having any access to justice. But there's also, I think, another way of looking at it, and that is these systems can change society. So, like let's say the health system says that no, we want to be a change. We want to be a model for how society should be. Or say if the teachers, faculty in schools say no, we want children to understand that discrimination is not acceptable, then they can change systems. And sometimes it's individuals who can make that difference. So I don't think we should underestimate the power of individuals, especially if you're looking at that wheel of power. If you are closer in the wheel of power, and you're also using it to bring about positive change, then I think it's a good thing. And we need to be aware of that. And we need to, I think, take certain, uh, break certain boundaries, be willing to ruffle some feathers. Even if, say, we have come in, say, through some affirmative action. Say you come in because of your gender, or because of your religion or caste or whatever. But if you're not going to change the status quo, if you're going to behave exactly like someone who's from oppressor caste or majoritarian religion, then it doesn't really matter. At the same time, you shouldn't do it at the cost of your own mental health. Like there's no point taking up a system which is beyond you. So I think we need to also be smart in how we work with systems. But I think we also need to understand that all of us have that potential in different ways. Of course, we have to take care of our families, of our children, of our safety, of our own mental health, of our livelihood, of our dreams, aspirations, of our leisure time. All of those are important. We don't need martyrs. Like we don't need people who just go there and say, okay, shoot me or something. I think we need smart people. Mm, but I think we also need to participate more, in the sense we can't be observers when there's injustice happening, especially when we have some access to power. Like say if a teacher is discriminating a child and saying you don't attend the maths class because you don't need to, you're not going to do anything with it anyway, you're going to clean the toilets, or you're going to sweep the class, or something like that. There is a role for the other students, there is a role for the other parents, there is a role for the other faculty, there's a role for the principal. We can't just watch in discrimination happening and say it's not our problem. I think it's all our problem. um, and I think that's how the kind of system can be changed. And like say for example, you go to a police station and you're throwing your weight around saying I'm privileged, I'm entitled, and the policeman says no, listen, I'm seeing this person, that person might be poor or whatever it is, but I'll finish with that person and then I'll talk to you. Then that's a lesson they teach me. And I think all systems have the potential, great power to change the system. It's a society, even those of us within systems. That's what, yeah, I was saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's a very helpful perspective, right? And, I mean, it's also easy to be able to. And I think this is something that's come up as well in several of the interviews that we've had and, just discussions that we've had, is there's so much potential individually for each of us to be able to affect change in small ways. And I think it's important to also know that that doesn't have to be very visible to the world in that sense, but also it could just be things you're doing at home. It could be things you're doing in the spaces you occupy, that can carry that potential for change while also hoping for change to come in via the system in itself as well, and so on. Yeah. Okay, so that was most of what I wanted to ask you, Dr. Sylvia. Any last thoughts that you would like to share with us before closing?
I mean, yeah, basically, I want to say that even when we're silent spectators or silent participants or enablers of this kind of discrimination, we also contribute because people, unless you challenge people, they're going to continue, and uh, they're going to keep aggravating. It's going to get worse and worse. It's going to escalate. If you see what happened with the Nazis and in Germany, it didn't happen like overnight. It's not like people just woke up and said, okay, today we'll just be extremely racist and target a community. It just happened gradually, and we have lessons from history. I think we need to be very cognizant of it, and we need to be very vigilant, and we also need to understand that we are also equal participants. We're not just that it's happening to someone else by someone else. And I think the healthcare system also has a specific responsibility, because we have the power, in the sense we can influence change. Therefore, we need to start looking inwards also. How is our medical education? How is the kind of teaching that we do to our students? What are the kind of students that we are including, and who are those we are excluding? And when they do come in, how welcoming are these spaces? Like college life for everyone should be fun, and should be something they enjoy. It shouldn't be some deeply traumatic experience for someone. Similarly, workspaces should be places where you feel, okay, I have a skill, I'm able to contribute, I have weaknesses, that people are there to support me, to work with them. Rather than saying, okay, every flaw of mine is going to be used against me. I'm never going to be as good enough as someone else. It's an unequal space. So I think each of us, we don't have to do big things, but what's happening within our families, in our own homes. How do we treat people who are providing services to us? How do we behave, say, in our apartments, in our hospitals, in our schools, in our workplaces? I think that's where people can start actually making change. And those changes are very significant. You don't have to be a big politician or a big minister and make like some national level changes. We can all work on that. And I think it changes the narrative. Instead of everyone saying it's okay to be discriminatory, they're saying, hey, actually I agree with what that person is saying. And it kind of, you start a movement in your own spaces where you say these things are not going to be acceptable or tolerated. At least I'll speak out against it.
That note of all of us being more vigilant of ways in which we can um, interrupt discrimination or just processes of oppression. Thank you so much, Dr. Sylvia, for joining us and for sharing all of the insights that you've shared. I think it's immensely valuable and is going to contribute to our understanding, practice in significant ways. So, thank you once again.
Thank you, Ganga, for doing what you're doing.